Okay, you guys, welcome back. In this video, we're learning Photoshop. Now, sometimes when I talk to other photographers, some of my students perhaps, people tend to be scared of Photoshop. And I've never really understood why. I guess I've been using it for a long time, so I'm just used to it. But something about Photoshop tends to scare people. And it might be because there's just so many options and so many things, so many moving pieces, that it could be overwhelming. But, my goal is to try to show you that it's not scary at all. It's actually super duper helpful and handy once you know where things exist. And I think that that's kind of just it is once you know where things and tools exist in Photoshop, it isn't as scary as you think it is. Okay. There are very specific things that I go to Photoshop to do. The bulk of my editing I'll do in Evoto these days because Evoto is one of my new favorites and the AI stuff is crazy good. You've watched those videos that I made, and Lightroom has its purpose for batch editing and all that stuff, but there's certain things that, you can only do in Photoshop. Like if you need to remove something very specific, or you want to replace something, or you want to do some very fine-tune adjustments and have full control over how much opacity something's going to have, and you want to brush something in or brush something out. Like these are things still only Photoshop can do, so I still keep it around and I still use it. Okay, so to get started here, we're going to go down to the bottom right. Now, what I think is the first important thing to know is that if you click here, this is your adjustment layers, okay? So if I click it, you get all of these photo editing adjustments. And these are things you're used to that you would use in Lightroom. So, color and vibrance, clarity, dehaze, grain, brightness, contrast. It's just laid out differently. But the big thing that you're going to need to understand is that everything that you want to do to an image, once you click that effect, it happens in layers. Okay, so for example, let me explain what the layers look like. Let's pick a simple thing that we might want to do. For example, okay, let's do curves. Okay, I'm going to click curves. And now what happens here is the curve is on its own layer. So the image at the bottom here is my original image, and we're going to leave that. But then we're going to start adding effects on individual layers. Now, why that's important is because once we add an effect, we have the ability now to bring the opacity down. So you don't have to have the effect at full power. And this is the best part of Photoshop, is that we can add stuff to the image and just get so much control by backing down the opacity. So let me show you an example. In curves, if I were to add a simple S curve, which is a very common technique for adding contrast to your image, you make a little S on the curve like this. So you bring your blacks down, you bring the mids up a little bit, and then bring the highlights up as well. That adds contrast, okay? But it's too much. It's too powerful. Now, if I did this in Lightroom, you're kind of stuck with it as is, right? Here, first of all, I have the ability to click on opacity. And now if I bring the opacity slider down, I can back that effect off, and it can be just very slight, 10%, 8%, something like that, or more, maybe 40, up in the 40s, 50s. You decide what you want it to look like. But just having that control alone is fantastic, okay? Now, the other thing is that each layer, you can also control the blend mode. Now, something that I like to do for this example, if I bring this back to full power, if I add contrast, whether it's the contrast slider or this S curve, it does ruin my skin tones. Now it's changed the color. Everything looks a little more orangey, okay? So something that you can do in Photoshop is you could choose a blend mode that doesn't affect skin tones. And that one is down here called luminosity. And I do this all the time in Photoshop, is I would add the S curve or some contrast, and then I'd go to my blend modes and click on this luminosity one. And now it's affecting just the blacks and the whites, but it didn't ruin my skin tone. So now I can also still bring the power down. So there's nothing, but here's here's about half. There's half. Okay. And even if I went more full power like that, so 80%, it didn't ruin my skin tone. So if I toggle this on and off, my skin tones still look really nice, but now it's just affecting the darks and the whites, okay? So that's super handy to know. And we haven't done anything crazy complicated yet. We did a very basic effect, some contrast. We made it so that it had a blend mode that didn't ruin my skin tones, and then we backed the opacity down. So if you only remember one thing, it's that these effects happen on their own layer, and you can choose how much of it to add or not add. Now, the next thing to understand is that when you add a simple effect, it already comes with this thing called a mask or a layer mask, okay? Right now, this white box that you're seeing here, this layer mask, it's white. That means that the effect is visible to us, okay? Um, if I wanted the effect to not show up at all and we wanted to hide it, I would press Apple I for invert. I can invert the mask, or Command I. So I'm going to hit that, and now it hides the mask. Or it hides the effect. So that mask is black. So the effect is gone. Now, why would we do that? Okay, so here's why we would do that. Because maybe we only want that effect to be in one spot on the image. Maybe I don't want it to be over the whole image. And this is another reason why Photoshop is so powerful. So what I would do is I would hop over to the left side here and grab a paintbrush. Okay, so we haven't talked about this yet, but there's all sorts of tools over on this left side. But if I grab a paintbrush like that, without diving too deep into paintbrushes yet, there'll be a separate video on the brushes, but I could then choose to paint in this curves layer just on my face. Like if I want some pop right here, but not necessarily anywhere else, I can paint that in. Now, I do have to make sure that this black box here is set to white. So I'm going to hit X and flip that. Okay, that just makes sure that the brush is set to paint. And then I'm gonna paint in the effect just on my face, and you can see it now. And you can also see it over here where it painted it in, okay? So now it didn't have to affect the whole image because I kind of liked the darker background. I only wanted pop on the highlights on my face. Just makes my face pop, okay? Now, again, if I think it's too much, just back the opacity down, okay? So I don't want it to be too much, but I want a little pop. Like something like that looks cool. Okay, now that I see it and I like it, something I might decide to do is maybe my hands over here. What if we paint it in over here, and maybe we paint the camera out a little bit too? Okay, so it's pretty awesome, pretty powerful. It just gives you so much control, and you can really pinpoint where you're adding effects to. Great. So now that we understand that, let's go back to our adjustment layers down at the bottom here. I'm going to click on that, and let's pick one more thing. So I'm going to pick hue and saturation, okay? Now, remember, Photoshop is dealing with layers, so as soon as I click it, it's going to make a brand new layer, okay? We still have the layer mask. That shows up automatically, which is super handy. We don't have to add those after. They show up right away. And white, again, it means the effect is showing. Now, the saturation, hue and saturation is up over here. You can see my sliders, okay? So what I want to do, and I tend to do this for photos, is I want to bring the saturation down a bit just to get rid of some of the orange and yellow that's in my skin. So I'm going to back the saturation down just a little bit until I feel like my skin looks a bit better. But again, like I've now said a few times, I don't have to do it just there. I can also bring the opacity down too if I want to just make it super duper subtle. So you can kind of fine tune it by going back and forth. You can move this slider, or you could move that along with bringing the opacity down just to get really minute changes, okay? So that's super handy. Now, just so you can see another example, let's add one more. Let's do, what could we do here that's fun? Let's add a filter. Let's see what lives in here. Okay, photo filter. And they have some presets. So we can go through and add a preset if we like it. Let's pick one like maybe a cool one. Cool filter 82. Cooling filter 82. Let's try that. That's cool. Okay. But it's a little heavy-handed. So again, same thing as we've talked about. Now all I would do is just bring the opacity down. Okay, and then I can choose how much I want. So let me just see. Okay, that's not bad. So now we can toggle this on and off and see. So here's before, here's after. Actually, I don't mind it. That cooling filter is kind of nice. Let's leave that. So now you can see we've got all these layers. And if another nice thing is if you want to revisit something or readjust, you can just click on that layer and go back and do it, right? And you know, if you decide you didn't like what you did and you took it too far, you can just delete a layer, right? Like if we don't want this photo filter, click on it, and then hit delete and take it away, and then, you know, get back to work and figure out what you do like. Okay, I'm gonna undo that because I actually did like it, so I'm gonna put it back. I'm gonna go Apple Z and put that back. I'll keep that effect on. So next thing we're going to look at is just some of the essential tools down on this left side here, because there are a lot of options available to you. You've got all these selection tools here. There's some preset shapes like rectangle, elliptical, and straight line. This one I use more often than the preset ones is because this gives me a little bit more control. So I like this lasso tool. Lasso, however you say that. Because if I want to make a selection, I can just draw it in. It's kind of like having a pencil or a pen tool. You can just do it yourself and choose where to make your selection. So for anything that needs to get selected quick, you can just do that. Super duper quick, okay? Now, another important one that you're going to want to know is the crop tool. So that lives over here. So anytime you need to recrop your images, you just play with that guy, just like you would in any other program. Then after that, we get into some brushes like this remove tool, healing brushes, patch tool. This is going to be stuff we'll talk about in later videos where we get into some skin retouching and getting rid of blemishes and stains and stuff like that. So this one will be handy. Then you have your general paintbrush tools. So this is going to be super duper handy. And we're going to use paintbrushes a lot. Okay. The stamp, clone stamp. We'll talk about that as well. Oops, I'll hit OK. Eraser, gradients, so all sorts of stuff. Text if you need to add it over here. Your pen tool as well. So yeah, there's going to be a ton of tools here, and I do highly suggest just go explore and see what there are. And I will have videos that touch on some of the most important ones. Okay, great. So now that we have seen some of the tools on this left-hand side, we also now know that our adjustment layers live over here. There's just a couple other things I'll point out. So down on the bottom here, if we want to make a new layer and not just have an effect, we just simply want to add a new layer that we could do really anything to. You just click down here, this little guy is create a new layer. So that just gives you a blank layer. So, you know, maybe you wanted to put text on that layer, or maybe you want to do some painting, or who knows what you want to do. But if you ever need a new layer, that's the way to do it. Okay, so I'm going to undo that. Okay, now another handy thing I'll show you guys is if you're done doing these basic adjustments and you want to move on to something like skin retouching or something else that's like a major editing thing, what I would do is highlight all of my adjustments, and I would put them in what's called a group or a folder. Okay, and I'm going to show you how this looks. So we're gonna highlight all of these layers. So I'll undo that. So we'll click. I'm going to hit the top one and go shift, so they all get highlighted. Now, even if you had like 10 or 20, 30 of these layers, you can still do it. Just highlight everything. You're going to right click or control click. Okay, and now I'm going to go down and I'm going to click on new group from layers. Okay, this one here, new group from layers. And I'm going to give it a name. We'll call this basic adjustments. Okay, basic adjustments. And when I hit OK, watch what happens. So now it put all of those adjustments, all those layers in its own folder. So now that just kind of cleaned things up on the side here. So I don't have a million things just overwhelming me. Anything that was part of my basic adjustments now lives in this folder, okay? And I could actually now toggle the entire thing on and off, and that would actually let me see my original photo, okay? And then if I expand the folder, now I can get to my individual adjustments. So that's super handy, and it's totally cleaned up the timeline here. And then I'm ready to move on to the next thing because I may decide, okay, I want to work on skin. I'd like to do some skin retouching, which we'll do in the next video. But then I would simply just go down here and make either a new layer or, maybe I want to do some other types of adjustments. So I'd go back over to my adjustment layers and start doing something new. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is that you're working on, you'll have something specific that you need to work on. But regardless, the point here is that this can help you get organized and keep things tidy, okay? Now, one final thing I'll show you guys to wrap up this intro to Photoshop video is if I wanted to use Photoshop's new generative fill, you have this panel down here. So you just have to make a selection of really anything that you want to work on. And I do that by selecting this lasso tool over here. Lasso tool. So for example, let's select my hat. We'll make a little selection. We're doing a manual selection. And let's just say I wanted my baseball hat to be red. You would hit generative fill. Okay. And then you just type in some specific instructions. So let's say red baseball cap. And we'll hit generate and see if it understands. And there we go. Cool. Not bad, not bad. Let's move this out of the way. So if we toggle this layer on and off, that's before, that's after, that's decent. You can go up here and scroll down a bit, and it does give you 3 options. So usually when you do this stuff, it spits out 3 variations, and you can click and see which one you prefer. So the middle one doesn't look as real. The first one actually, I think, is the best one. The second or the third one here, something's going on at the back here. I don't love whatever that blue is. So although that blue's kind of showing up too, it's because there's neon lights shining on me. So it's trying to deal with that somehow. But you know what? This is decent. We could paint this and fix this up later if we needed to. But just as an example to get you guys started, that's how this would work. And you can really take this as far as you want. And I'll have another video that focuses just on the generative AI stuff. So for now, at least you know that it exists and how you get there and get yourself started. So I hope this was helpful as an intro to Photoshop. It really doesn't have to be that scary. It's actually incredibly powerful, super helpful, and easy to use once you know where things exist. And that's the important part, is that it's all about understanding what tools you can use and where they live.